When I was a little boy, my Uncle Silas used to tell me about a man named Porky Sanders and how he knocked him into Kingdom Come. Porky the Gorilla, they used to call him, he would say, and he was champion of the world. A boxer? A boxer? My Uncle Silas would say with great derision. Boxing wasn't heard on. I'm talking about the days of prize fights. I'm talking about the days when you chewed a man's ear off if you didn't like his whiskers. Did you ever chew a man's ear off? I would say. Boy, he would say to me with great solemnity, I was champion ear chewer of the county. Then he would go on to tell me that it was about the year 1870, the year the horn wheat stood nearly 10 feet high in Dean's 40-acre, at the bottom of a lane. I ain't kidding you. Everything was bigger in them days. Satyr man, he would say, like Porky. At the time I'm telling you about, Porky stood 6'6" and weighed about 20 stone. He could hold 6 beer glasses in the palm of his hand. Yes, boy, the 2 men could stand in one leg of his trousers. Yes, he would say, all the best men were big men in them days. But you were a little man, I would say. My Uncle Silas would look at me with a deadly serious cock of one eye, with a bland, sly darkness that he always kept for awkward moments and awkward questions. Yes, boy, yes, I was a little man, he would say, but I always had a big head. After that, my Uncle Silas would go on to describe not only how big Porky Sanders was, and how famous he was, about what a smashing hellfire holy terror he was. It was not simply that he was a man who fought. It was not only that he was a man who bit off other men's ears. It seemed that he was a kind of dictator who walked about crushing other men under his foot, like beetles. He walked into public houses and bounced beer barrels, and if the landlord didn't like it, he would, my Uncle Silas said, bounce the landlord. If he fancied an apple, he clawed branches of apples from over a garden wall as he passed, and if he wanted a leg of mutton, he walked into the butcher's shop and grabbed the meat with one hand and belted the butcher with the other, and then walked out of the shop gnawing the raw meat like a toffee apple. If he fancied a girl, he picked her up and walked away with her under his arm, more or less, like a prize puppy. He drank a gallon of beer at a time, and when he walked down the street, the women went indoors, and the men all got together in a bunch for safety. Did I know a man named Sip Turner, a man whose nose that looked like a corkscrew? Well, that was some of Porky Sanders' work. Porky had picked up the man by the nose and spun him round like a Catherine wheel one day in '69, because he wouldn't call him sir. That's the kind of man he was, Silas said. The biggest, belching, blustering blackguard in the county. A real gorilla. And why, I would want to know, did he call him a gorilla? My Uncle Silas had an answer for everything. Been a sailor, he said. Been a sailor and got marooned for 18 months on an island off the coast of Africa. And all that time never ate nothing but gorilla meat. But you see, he said, that's what made him so strong. And so gradually I got fixed in my mind the awful, bloodthirsty, terrifying picture of the flesh-eating, ear-chewing, woman-grabbing Porky Sanders. The only thing that began to trouble me was how my Uncle Silas had knocked him into Kingdom Come. I'm coming to that, he would say. I'm coming to that. You see, it was like this. There was this lady, a great friend of mine, Vicky her name was, and one day Porky picked her up. Here my Uncle Silas would pause with great significance, as though this had been one of the fundamental moments in history. And that, he would say, is where he made a very great mistake. I bet you challenged him, I said. Yes, my Uncle Silas would say. Yes, boy, I challenged him. Her fists, any time, any place, every knock down or round. First to go on until one man couldn't get up no more. Yes, I challenged him, and he laughed at it, laughed fit to bust himself. I asked what happened then. I just let him laugh, boy, he said, and then I got to work. You see, Vicky didn't like being picked up by that gorilla any more than any other girl. She hated it like poison, but she couldn't do nothing. So I got on to her first. Vicky, I says to her, play on his pride. And then he would go on to tell me how the girl had played on his pride, asking him if he was afraid of a little bit of a winkle like Silas, telling him how people were saying he was afraid, and urging him to cut Silas up, once and for all, into sausage meat. She kept at him for days, and at last it worked. Then, Silas said, I got her to feed him on cucumbers. You see, it was hot weather, and she'd say to him, Porky dear, you gotta keep your blood cool. Porky dear, the best thing in the world you can eat is cucumbers. And she got round him on that too, and somehow she kept him on nothing but cucumbers for a fortnight. Cucumbers and beer, he said, and then went on to tell me how he worked with the landlord at the pub too, how the beer would be free for Porky every night, and not only how it would be free, but how every pint had been specially jiggered behind the bar. A spoonful of salts in it, a pill or two, a packet of something from the chemist's, things that turned his stomach to fire and water. So that in the end, my Uncle Silas said, what with the belly ache from the beer and the belly ache from the cucumbers, Porky turned up for the fight looking as green as a boiled frog. And all he had to do, I said, was lick him with one hand. Better than that, my Uncle Silas said, with great modesty. Better than that. I licked him with no hands at all. There was always a moment in my Uncle Silas's stories when something or other seemed too good to be true, and this, it seemed to me, was such a moment. Uncle Silas must have seen the doubt rising in my eyes, for a moment later he went on. Boy, didn't I tell you I was a little man, but I had a big head? Well, I didn't tell you that for nothing. He cocked his bloodshot eye at me with a swift, diabolical wickedness. The fight was down on Vine Hills, he went on. You know, under the wood, just before you get to that big slope. Near the river, I said. Aye, near the river, he said, and then he went on to tell me how it had happened. How all he had to do was clutch the gorilla by the waist and bunt his head into his stomach, tired and weak already from beer and purges and cucumbers, and how at first it was a kind of standstill bunting, then a run and a bunt, and then a charge and a bunt, every bunt producing a low, agonizing, sour sort of groan. Finally, I got a picture of my Uncle Silas standing halfway across the field, and Porky being held up by the thick, excited crowd, and my Uncle Silas bearing down on him with a sort of charge of the Light Brigade. Porky being driven inexorably farther and farther down the slope, until at last, with a triumphant and masterful bunt, my Uncle Silas put him with a sort of inverted belly flopper into the river. At the end of it, my Uncle Silas would gaze airily about him with extreme modesty. Yes, that's how, he would say. I knocked Porky Sanders into Kingdom Come. Is it? A voice would say. And we would turn to see, as always at the conclusion of some riper, more racy tale, my Uncle Silas's housekeeper in the room, tart, irascible, iron-eyed, disgusted. Well, if it is, she would say, I'd be ashamed, I would, telling the boy such downright nonsense and such tales about things that never happened. For a minute my Uncle Silas, sardonic and unruffled, would retain a kind of apostolic composure. Then he would speak. Tales, he would say. I don't see no difference in telling a tale like that and telling a tale about a woman turning into a pillar of salt, or a man who was alive for 3 days in a fish's belly. And now that I come to think of it, nor do I.